Its role in the 2020 presidential elections. Glitches, errors, money trails to powerful Democrats. Dominion is just one of 3 major companies providing voting systems to America. But Dominion captured headlines when it was discovered it had glitched 6,000 votes, giving Biden a fraudulent win. This was not an isolated event. In 2016, Antrim County, Michigan affirmed its Republican loyalties by voting Trump 62%, beating Clinton by 4,000 votes. Fast forward 4 years, and Antrim County was shocked to find itself voting Joe Biden over Trump by 3,000 votes, a complete flip from the last presidential election. Something was very wrong. When the county set to work with a manual recount, they discovered a ghastly error. 6,000 Trump votes were accidentally tallied for Biden. RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel held a press conference noting a litany of irregularities in Michigan. But when it came to Antrim County, the irregularity was potentially much bigger in scale.
When they inquired with the clerk, they were told it was a software issue and it was corrected. But now we know that 47 counties use that same software.
It was certainly odd. Republicans wanted an investigation to ensure no more such mistakes happened elsewhere. However, Michigan's Democrat Secretary of State was quick to pronounce such concerns as ridiculous, immediately denouncing any suspicion of technical foul play. Quote, "The software did not cause a misallocation of votes. It was a result of user human error." See? No need to investigate. After all, it's 2020 and software errors are impossible. Right?
I'm here to tell you that the electronic voting machines Americans got to solve the problem of voting integrity, they turned out to be an awful idea.
One vote for McCain.
That's because people like me can hack them all too easily.
That was some professor out of Michigan back in 2018 in the New York Times. Ignore that. The system Michigan Democrats don't want Republicans to investigate, the system part of what DHS proclaimed, quote, "the most secure in American history." Meet Dominion Voting Systems. A Canadian firm, Dominion is one of 3 companies providing 90% of America's voting systems. Dominion serves 28 U.S. states, including battlegrounds like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona, all of Georgia, and Nevada. Incidentally, Michigan was not the only battleground state to experience problems with Dominion. Georgia went all in with Dominion, buying 30,000 machines installed across the state. Just 9 months before the general election, Georgia's Secretary of State boasted of his state's partnership with Dominion to install all these new machines.
Dominion and the Secretary of State's office worked very closely together on making sure we had the staff here to get these things put through.
A few months later, in Georgia's June primaries, Dominion proved to have a few hiccups. Don't take it from us. Here's PBS.
The poll pads took as long as 30 hours to download the voter database, displayed the wrong races, and would randomly shut down. And the power-hungry ballot marking devices blew circuit breakers in numerous locations. Poll workers, many of whom had no hands-on training because of the pandemic, were often befuddled by the new technology.
Indeed, even by the general election 5 months later, Georgia was still in trouble.
They have not certified the elections, including 2 of the most populous in the state, between technical issues.
Let's begin with Liza Lucas. She's live at Gwinnett County's elections office in Lawrenceville, where thousands of votes are in limbo because of a software issue.
There is an issue in Gwinnett County, as officials have told us, that 60,000 Gwinnett County ballots are in limbo after a software issue, and this is according to the communications director of Gwinnett County.
While all of this plays out before our eyes, Republicans demand investigations, but government officials demand we look away.
There have not been any evidence of anything that would undermine the validity of this election, and it's time to move forward.
Meanwhile, the Trump legal team under former New York Mayor and prosecutor Rudy Giuliani disagreed. Antrim County put Dominion Systems front and center, Now we must dig deeper.
Now we've got to look at how often did it break down in other parts of the state. And when you look back on the history of Dominion, which is a Canadian firm, it's made mistakes in Canadian elections similar to that.
The Trump legal team's Dominion wing is led by General Michael Flynn's attorney, Sidney Powell, who has long warned Americans the dangers of our election systems relying on foreign software. Mind you, no one is claiming that Dominion is solely responsible for the fiasco and the vote irregularities that defined the 2020 general election. But when we return, prepare to be stunned when you find out just how easy it is to manipulate votes through Dominion. Why one major state deemed Dominion dangerously easy to hack, and how one hacker read the user guide flagging stunning questions for the feds. We'll be right back.
Methods of communication have changed throughout history with the advancement of technology. Since first declaring his candidacy in 2015, President Trump has relied on Twitter to share his thoughts directly with the American people. But the 45th president was not the first president to rely on the technology of the times to get his message out. Calvin Coolidge made the first presidential radio address in 1923, making his voice the most heard of any man in history. This was the first time people across the country could hear the president speak at the same time, all from the comfort of their own homes. A decade later, this evolved into Franklin D. Roosevelt's fireside chats.
DEF CON is an annual hacker conference, and in my world, conferences tend to be these sort of big sponsored events with elaborate advertisements everywhere. But DEF CON is very unique in that everybody who attends, including press, pays $300 cash to attend. There are no sponsors. It is a fiercely independent spirit on display there. And it had set off, when we arrived, a sort of paranoia in Las Vegas. You know, the word hacker has these dark connotations, and so people were going to elaborate lengths to try to protect themselves from hackers. Everything from cab drivers to the wait staff at a restaurant we ate at were saying that they were turning their phones off when they got in the vicinity of these people. When we got there, we were in fact made to feel pretty welcome, and it turns out that the people in attendance are not the loners, you know, working on behalf of the Russian government, at least none that we saw. People tend to, the tradition there is people coming in who are either employed by big companies helping them to imagine the worst case scenarios that hackers might perpetrate on them, or just independent spirits who do that kind of thing for intellectual curiosity or other motivations. We were there specifically to attend something called the Voting Village, which is something that's gone on for 3 years, and in this, its third year, they had assembled some of the most common voting machines in the country, both systems that are on the front end that you and I use to actually register our vote, and the back end, tabulators and so forth, that you would feed a paper ballot into or that oversee a system. What was so interesting was I assumed, coming into it, that the big manufacturers, companies like ES&S and Dominion, had provided these machines to the hackers to, you know, field test them. But no, it turns out there's an extremely hostile relationship there, and that ES&S and Dominion and other companies have basically said, we don't want to participate, and really have been quite aggressive in saying we don't want to be part of this. So the organizers were reduced to finding these machines on eBay, which right there is pretty terrifying, because it turns out that anybody can buy some of the most common machines in use on eBay. What was really alarming was when you see these hackers, and these are people who've never seen these machines before, have had no practice on them for the most part, come in and engage them, they immediately get into the guts of them. Beyond that, we were seeing Dominion's ImageCast system. It's a line of tabulators that paper ballots are fed into. That had its guts all over the room. It was not clear to us whether this was the most recent version of the ImageCast hardware, but it's important to note that Georgia just spent over is about to spend over $100 million on a contract with Dominion to provide ImageCast hardware to the state in time for the for the next primaries and for the 2020 election. And yet here these kids were who had opened it up. They said, look, you can pop the front off of it, and here's a port you can get into right here. That's easy. You know, all kinds of stuff that you could certainly do within 6 minutes behind a curtain, much less if you had extra time because any of these were connected to the web, as we discovered a couple of days before. So many of them are. So at the end of the event, Voting Village issues a report, and so we'll be expecting one from them. And they're very transparent about it. I mean, the spirit of this event was transparency, trying to get these vulnerabilities out into the world so that I guess the idea is that the companies will be forced to correct them in some way. The front of each machine was a little post-it that showed off what had been found out by the various hackers. So at one point, you know, the admin password was just sitting there on there because it turns out that the same admin password applies to multiple machines across the room. And those machines were created in the 2000s, which means that they were in fact created so you can't change that admin password. They're just locked for all time in that way. There does not seem to be any political momentum on some of the bills that are under consideration right now around trying to keep these machines off the internet or trying to establish some sort of certifiable ballot, paper ballot system or any of the other things that have been proposed. And so the combination of seeing the incredible vulnerabilities that we saw on display in real time at this event and the lack of institutional action around the security of the vote, all of that made for an extremely alarming weekend.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos.
Good afternoon. I'm Fred Kemp. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here at the Atlantic Council today on behalf of everyone at the Atlantic Council, on behalf of Annie Piparinen, who's pulled all this together, so a salute to you for everything you're doing in our Cyber Statecraft Initiative, Annie, for the launch of this crucially important report. And, you know, people standing at podiums say things like crucially important. It really is. Hacking the election, lessons from the DEF CON voting village. Here at the Atlantic Council, we operate under the enduring mission of working together to secure the future. This is meant seriously here because the founders of the Atlantic Council were there at the creation. In fact, one of the people who helped found us was Dean Acheson, who wrote the book there at the creation of the International Liberal Order. We see that order as being under threat. And we see one of the things that's most under threat in the order we created is the advance and the protection and the security of democracies. We believe a stable, prosperous world depends on building and sustaining democracy, and democracy depends on the sanctity of the vote. In recent years, this fundamental core to our system of government has come under threat. Unprecedented assaults in the United States and Europe are bringing scrutiny and uncertainty to once inviolable electoral processes. We at the Atlantic Council have been doing quite a bit of work in countering disinformation, both within our Eurasia Center and in our Digital Forensic Research Lab, some really cutting-edge work. We haven't done yet work in this area, so it's a particular pleasure and honor to be associated with this event and the work behind it. In the current geopolitical climate, preserving, or in some cases reinstating, public faith in the integrity and security of our elections is more crucial than ever before. This can only be achieved if we're able to protect the technologies underpinning our democracy. While much of the discussion over the past 12 months has focused on the Russian-linked information operations with carefully timed leaks, fake news, Facebook ads most recently, recent revelations have made clear how vulnerable the very technologies we use to manage our records, cast our votes, and tally our results really are, and that's new. We now have alarming evidence of Russian-connected hackers successfully breaching electronic poll books and state and local voter databases in at least 21 states across the United States, This recently released by the Department of Homeland Security, and you have to understand how careful DHS is before it puts out this kind of information. The technical community, including many Atlantic Council experts, have attempted to raise alarm about these threats for some years. This summer, the experts on today's panel and others concerned about the safety of the vote teamed up with the world's largest hacker conference, DEF CON, to host the first ever, and I underline this, first ever voting machine hacking village. This determined group invited security researchers to probe 24 electronic voting machines, many of which are still in use today. The hackers were able to break into and gain remote control of the machines in a matter of minutes. These findings from the voting village are incredibly disconcerting. We at the Atlantic Council applaud the groundbreaking and tireless work of the organizers to shed light on these threats and this unsettling reality. We believe that transparency is about 80% of what is needed here, because you have to actually understand and know the threat in order to get the targets and others to take care of defending themselves. This is not simply a cybersecurity issue, but one of the most pressing national security concerns eating at the bedrock of our democracy. The Council's own cyber team is proud to have supported this critical effort by taking Representatives James Langevin and Will Hurd to Las Vegas this July, the first sitting congressman to ever attend the conference and witness firsthand its voting village. We're honored to continue this partnership by convening today's discussion, and we look forward to assisting in the next steps in this crucially important effort. You may have read in USA Today that a group is coming together to try to continue to work and continue to work around this, and we're proud to be part of that. Before I turn it over to Jeff Moss for his remarks, let me take a moment to introduce our panelists. Jeff is the founder of two of the most influential information security conferences in the world, DEF CON and Black Hat, and he's a senior fellow with the Atlantic Council's Cyber Statecraft Initiative in our Brent Scowcroft Center on International Security. Ambassador Douglas Lute is the former U.S. permanent representative to NATO and serving under President Obama from 2013 to 2017. Prior to this, and after retiring from active duty as Lieutenant General after 35 years of service, he served as the assistant to the President and Deputy National Security Advisor under President Bush, as well as President Obama. We have a bipartisan ethos. You've worked in a real hands-on bipartisan manner. John Gilligan is the chairman of the board at the Center for the Internet Security. He served as president of the Schaefer Corporation, senior vice president at SRA International, and chief information officer at the U.S. Air Force and Department of Energy. Sherry Ramsey is senior advisor to the CEO at Cyberpoint International, engaged in strategy development and planning. She's the former director of the NSA CSS Threat Operations Center. That's a pretty big job and pretty significant position, where she led discovery and characterization of threats to national security systems. Harry Hursty is the founding partner of Nordic Innovation Labs and one of the organizers of the DEF CON Voting Village. He has fascinating insights. I've just heard a little bit outside this room on this problem that we're talking about today. He's one of the world's leading authorities in the areas of election voting security and critical infrastructure security, and as an ethical hacker, famously demonstrated how certain voting machines could be hacked, ultimately altering voting results. Our moderator today is Jake Brown. Jake is a lecturer at the University of Chicago and CEO of Cambridge Global Advisors and co-organizer of the DEF CON Voting Village. Jake also serves as strategic advisor on cybersecurity to the Department of Homeland Security and the Pentagon. So this is a heavyweight group, and we're all looking forward to your reflections. Huge thanks for all of you joining us today and joining us online, and thank you for everything you contribute to this work. Lastly, I encourage everyone in the audience or watching online to take part in the conversation by following at AC Scowcroft and at Voting Village DC, and by using the hashtag AC Cyber. So there's actually two C's there. So hashtag AC Cyber. And now, without further delay, let me turn the podium over to Jeff.
Thank you. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to just start with a little bit of a story to give you some context on how we got here. And then just a couple of thoughts on where I think we're going. For those of you curious, we've had electronic voting machines for a long time, and hackers have been talking about them for a long time. I think Harry's been poking at them for 14 years. At DEF CON, we had one of our first speakers talk about this concept of black box voting machines more than 10, 12 years ago. So in the hacking world, it's not new. What's new, though, is the attention on them and the importance that they're now playing in our democracy. So how did we get here? I want to blame this guy, Jake. Blame him. Jake was this national security coordinator between the White House and DHS back when I first started at the Homeland Security Advisory Council. And so I got to know Jake, and he was really passionate about voter protection when he was involved in the Obama campaign. And so maybe last year we're talking, and Jake, still with his voter protection hat on, is saying, you know, I bet these machines are just, there's got to be problems with these machines, right? It's like, oh yeah, there's definitely problems with these machines. I just don't know what they are, but I can tell you there's got to be problems. So I start looking online, and I look for reports, and I look for studies, and I look for, you know, security analysts tearing these machines apart, and you can't find any. You can find an Everest report from 2008. You can find some very controlled reports where the manufacturers got the researchers to sign NDAs and do very limited testing over a couple of days. But for a hacker, like, that doesn't count. Like, I want to see the pictures. I want to see, like, the trials and tribulations of the people attacking these machines. And so I told them I couldn't really find anything, but I'm sure they're just a disaster. And then maybe a couple more weeks went by, and then he said, you know what, you should just get a bunch of hackers to tear these things apart. It's like, well, that's a great idea. But we're not going to be able to get any of these from the manufacturers. They're so tightly controlled. There's purchase, sale agreements. You're not going to get these machines or the software. But I started looking on eBay, and sure enough, thank you, eBay, there are some to be found. Right? I mean, we have two here that Harry's going to hack into later. So sure enough, okay, we could get our hands on some machines, and they're not that expensive because these things never get updated. They've been around for like a decade, so you can get these things fairly inexpensively. And so I allocated some space. We got some people together. We started ordering machines, and then I realized I'm not a voting machine expert. I can tell you about generalized security problems. I can tell you historically what kind of systems have had issues, but I can't tell you the ins and outs specifically. So my friend Harry, Matt Blaze, Sandy Clark, and some others who have spent more than a decade looking at these said, okay, well, you get the machines and you get us the space and we'll run the village. And it was really fascinating because if you're not familiar with DEF CON, we have about 25,000 people that show up. And that divides into many different topic areas. But as soon as we announced the voting village, I got state, local, county election officials contacting me, desperate for information. Like, I have these machines and I have no idea what they do. I have these machines and I don't know if I can trust any of the documentation. Tell me what you find. And so we would try to get them to come out, and they're like, I have no budget, I can't travel. Can you just live stream people attacking the machines? It's like, I don't know how much that's going to help you, but we'll write this report, and this will hopefully help you. So this report is a culmination of a lot of things. One, it is the first step in trying to change the narrative. As you'll read, these machines were pretty easy to hack. And this flies in the face of the narrative that's been spun by the manufacturers, which is you have to be an insider, you have to have specific knowledge of the technology. Random people aren't going to be able to just approach these machines and hack them. They're going to need to spend some time to study them and understand the context. And I think we opened the doors and 35 minutes later one of the machines fell. It turns out that hacking technology is pretty much hacking technology. And if you look at the history of DEF CON, we've hacked automobiles, implantable medical devices, airplanes, physical locks, access control systems, Internet of Things devices, adult toys, ATM machines. So chances are, yes, we're going to be able to hack your 10-year-old election machine. The difference now is that it counts. Now people are paying attention. They weren't paying attention 10 years ago. And so the other thing is, now it's not a conversation, I think, between us and the state and local officials. I think this really needs to be more of a discussion at a higher, more national security level. And I was struck by something Ambassador Lutz said, which was essentially there's two ways to change a government, the bullet box or the ballot box. And I thought about that for a while, and we spend a lot of money on the bullet box. We have nuclear triads, we have oversight, we have testing ranges, we have a large amount of money and technology invested in the bullet box. How much do we have in the ballot box? Pretty much nothing. It was only just recently classified as critical infrastructure. So they're both, I believe, equally important. But all of our energy is in the more exciting bullet box. And I think part of what we're going to say here is it really needs to also be the ballot box, because this problem is not going away. It's only going to accelerate. So 3 things made this possible. The first, we have a 3-year DMCA exception. Normally, you wouldn't be able to reverse engineer these things for copyright violations, and the manufacturers aggressively use DMCA takedown notices to prevent researchers from publishing results or looking at these machines. There was a 3-year exception. This last year was year 2. Next year is year 3. If we can get that exemption renewed or in permanent position, researchers will just be able to take apart this technology and really provide an independent view of what's going on here. That was not ever possible before. And so once we removed sort of the fear of litigation and we lined up an impressive array of lawyers waiting to defend us if anything happened, we felt pretty confident going to the conference that if anybody was going to sue us, we were going to have enough resources to defend ourselves. And this time, with the DMCA out of the way, we would be able to defend ourselves. The second one was a giant storm that collapsed the roof of a building where a county was storing all their voting machines. And the insurance company totaled out all the equipment in the facility, including the voting machines. And the insurance company owned the voting machines now. There's no purchase and sale agreement. There's no sort of NDA covering this equipment. The insurance company didn't want it. They gave it away to a recycler, an electronics recycler, who then, now they have the equipment with no NDA and no purchase agreement signed. So now, if we get our hands on these machines, we can do whatever we want. We're not violating any rules, any civil law. Well, the manufacturer contacted them and said, hey, can you please disassemble all the machines? And, basically take them out of commission. And he said, sure. How much do you want to pay me per machine? So, well, we want to pay you $0. It's like, well, would you like to buy all the machines back? Well, no. It's okay. Well, this is my number. Call me back anytime you're willing to, change your mind. And he just started selling them on eBay. And ladies and gentlemen, the TSX voting machine. And last, the final ingredient was that we have this culture of hacking things and exploring and publishing results. And so it was these 3 things: upcoming DEF CON, the storm, and the DMCA made this possible for the first time. And really, that's totally unacceptable. We've been using these machines for more than a decade, and this is the first time we get to actually look under the hood. That doesn't make any sense as a country. Like, something is wrong there from a policy standpoint, and we need to really understand what's going on and how do we fix that. Because we can't run our country like this. When's the next storm going to happen, right? So I really want us to think about that. That said, I'd like to hand it over to Jake, who's going to go into a moderated Q&A session, and then when we're done, we're going to go to the audience and answer any questions.